Welcome. You're listening to Latin Waves with your hosts, Sylvia and Stuart Richardson. Latin Waves is more than just hot rhythms. This is a show about community, about creating a culture that is inclusive and based on fairness. Because everyone deserves dignity, respect, and has something to contribute. A new world is possible, and it all starts with us. You are listening to Latin Waves. I'm your host, Sylvia Richardson. I am delighted to be joined by author and journalist BRANDI MORIN. She is the author of Our Voice of Fire, a memoir of a warrior rising. BRANDI is also an award-winning Cree, Iroquois, French multimedia journalist from Treaty 6 territory in Alberta. Among her many awards over a decade of recording on Indigenous oppression in North America, she has won 2 National Native American Journalism Awards in 2022 for her work in Jazeera English. I am so delighted to have you with us. Thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, Tanse, it's a pleasure to be here, Sylvia. Thank you.
Many people listen to the news and hope that the news will tell us stories that are really important. And, we have had over 2 years of constant fear about pandemic. But in the midst of all this, many things are happening. We have had war against the Wet'suwet'en people here in Turtle Island, in what we call British Columbia, unceded territory of the Wet'suwet'en people. They're being under war, in the midst of pandemic. In the midst of pandemic, we've had women disappear and murder. And I wonder, how have you, as a journalist, been reading this time, and what's important for us to know, to pay attention right now?
In the past, couple of years of the pandemic, it's been a, uncertain and, chaotic and frightening time for, the world. However, when it comes to the stories that I cover as a journalist, which is regarding Indigenous human rights and human rights violations, it's the status quo in regards to the apathy and the indifference that mainstream society continues to perpetuate, which in turn perpetuates the continued violence, that our people are experiencing. And I try in my work, to push forward these stories as much as possible. And that's why I left, the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation when I was working there, the CBC and others, to branch out and become a freelancer, because I wanted these stories to get beyond the borders of so-called Canada and to the world, in the hopes that the world would really start to learn about the different atrocities that are happening here, because Canada really has this facade that it's a just and, champion of human rights country, but that only applies, if you are mostly a white, settler Canadian citizen. It doesn't apply to Indigenous or BIPOC, populations. And so, our people are literally, dealing with trauma after trauma, and our women and girls and even our men are living through, a genocide against their lives. Our people are being murdered and being taken in what they call the missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls and Two-Spirit genocide. And it hasn't slowed down. And so when you say, how am I transversing that? I'm working hard to bring this, out of the veil of this facade, of the veil of, darkness. And you mentioned that I had, won these Native American Journalism Association awards. And I also won one of the highest awards for journalism in the awards this year, which is the Edward R Murrow Award. That was specifically for covering missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. And I went to New York City and I accepted that proudly, and not for myself, but because of the urgent need for these stories to be taken in, by the world in order to help stop this genocide. And so, we just keep pushing. And I think that we are making headway slowly. We had the graves of our children that were unveiled to the world, a year and a half ago, and the world acted shocked that this was going on here in this country. But I really think that helped open the door more for an international audience to really, see what's going on. And I think that the state and all of the different systems that, are contributing, to these inequality and this violence, this colonial-based system, I think that they are, starting to, feel that pressure.
One of the interesting stories that we've covered is that of Indigenous children who survive residential schools. And many people don't realize that the schools were open for 150 years, that the last one only closed in 1996, and that the countless numbers of people who have come forward about sexual assault, of abuse, of the children that die trying to escape the schools, and the trauma that endures. Like, now we know that trauma affects not just you, but also your progeny, right? It affects your cells.
Yeah.
It changes who you are. And on top of that, we are asked to heal. But in order to heal, what we know is that you need safety. You need a space that feels safe. And Indigenous people have not had that. It's legislation after legislation that displaces people, that, denigrates their whole being, whether it's by the kinds of stories that we hear cover. So when it comes to women, it seems particularly precarious because women lose their status, as it has been such an easy thing to just lose your identity. Yesterday you were part of the community, now you're not, because the government just suddenly declared that you no longer belong. Can you talk about how does this make not only the precarity of women, but also the susceptibility to them being exposed to violence and crimes such as this serial killer that's on the loose?
Let's take it back to when, European settlers first, came here to Turtle Island, and the Europeans operated in a, patriarchal system. Many, if not most, of the Indigenous tribal nations here operated via a matriarchal system, and the decision making and the leadership of the different communities were equal between men and women. And when the settlers came here, they imposed their patriarchal ideologies onto the Indigenous tribes, and stripped that power from Indigenous women and girls, because our people were heavily oppressed and herded onto concentration camps called reservations, and given rations of food, and then having their children, stolen from them to attend these houses of horrors called residential schools. And if families tried to intervene, they were literally threatened with arrest and jailed. So oftentimes the police would go with these priests to get the children, right from their homes. And everything that, this snowball effect of, all of this oppression that was put upon our people is reverberating to today, because we had, after the residential school system, we had what they call the 60s coup, was taking their children, away again from the families and placing them into foster care, into non-native homes. And a lot of the times, they were being taken away because the families were, completely torn apart from, experiencing these abuses of the residential school system, and this intergenerational trauma, that you're talking about, and trying to recuperate from that, and not having the resources or the tools to heal it. Instead of providing and offering that, the children were taken. And then we have the continued violence, right, from the police that started way back then that continue to target our people. And interestingly, or actually ironically, the majority of women that are in the prison systems in this country are Indigenous women. And in fact, Indigenous women make up more of the population in the prison system than Indigenous men. And so, when that power was taken away, and these new systems, came into place, those systems were designed to exploit from the beginning, to exploit and extract, from the stealing of the lands and the resources to the stealing and the raping, of our women and our children. And all of this is very much connected to what is going on today, because you had the continual degradation and the disposability of our women that is so systemic, in all of the systems and all of the mindsets of this country, that this has contributed to this genocide that has been going on for years, and that the numbers are not like slowing down. It's absolutely insane. And so you have to understand, from a broader context, how it's all of these different things are connected, but our women are stepping back in to their power and their place, returning to those matriarchal systems of leadership and community. And we're starting to see that, which brings me, hope for the situation that we're in.
There is so much lost in the language, and when we think of language, I often think about worlds. In so many ways, learning English was a way into a world I could have known otherwise. And it's the same for, I've English is not my first language, it's actually my third language. And but I think about the way that many indigenous cultures, languages are very rich in verbs. It's a world that's alive, and there's a certain aliveness within the language. And when you take children away for the sole purpose of dispossessing them of their culture, their language, their ways of seeing, their ways of knowing themselves, what that is a genocide, and we've been very shy in Canada to say, oh, it's a genocide, oh, it's not, or we say, well, it's maybe a culture, it's genocide. And so to speak of genocide is not very polite at the dinner table, perhaps, but it's so necessary, because until we realize that we live in a death culture, one that is extractivist, that's constantly pillaging and killing the earth, we now know that there's like literally 8 inches of soil, topsoil, that nurture every life, right? That's the food. And once you start making dead zones by putting in so many chemicals, we're literally killing the land. We're literally killing ourselves in the process. So I wonder if you could maybe talk about what it means for us to not only reclaim ourselves, as you say, as to see the warrior in rising, to see ourselves rise up out of the ashes, literally, but literally creating life in our path.
Yes. As women, as Iskul, which is, a woman in the Cree language, we have the ability to give life. We are life givers, and we are sacred in that, and always have been. Every woman in this world is sacred. Every woman in this world is under threat, and some, more than others. And there are revolutions that we see, happening at various stages. And, one of the ones that the world has recently been watching is the one in Iran, where the women there are rising up against oppression, rising up against death, rising up to stand for life. And when I am out there covering these different stories, for land defense and protecting the earth and the water systems that nourish, all of the different beings, on this earth, it is the women that are on the front line everywhere that I go. And I just think that it's a natural instinct because, we view the earth as a life giver, as our mother. And because we are mothers, we inherently stand to protect her and to protect our children and all of our future generations. Unfortunately, coinciding with everything that is happening to our Mother Earth, that same violence is happening to our women. However, our women are so strong and so powerful that cannot stop the death, the violence, all of the inequity, all of the oppression, all of the uncertainty. Through all of that, our women are still rising. Our women are still fighting. And they're not fighting, with weapons of traditional warfare, such as guns and bombs and violence. Our women are fighting with their voices and their love, and they're literally putting their bodies on the line.
One of the most beautiful images that always inspires me is there was a protest against fracking in Mi'kmaq territory, and there's this woman with one single feather, and she just, stands in front of the tanks. And I feel the energy return to realize that we are all connected. Colonization has been fracturing life for so long, for 500 years, 540 years if you really want to be literal. But I also know that life didn't start there. We were thriving before then, and we will thrive again. The indigenous people all over the world have had prophecies about the end of this time, right? And many people thought when the Mayan people were talking about the end of the world, is like it's ending. No, it meant the end of this cycle. So to realize that we move in cycles of life, nothing is ever static, nothing is ever nothing, even though it may seem like it's been going on for long, it cannot be permanent.
And I believe that we are in that transition, because before a new life cycle begins, you have the birth, and the birth is pain. The birth is the struggle. And I think that we are in the stage of that, that final push, and it's the hardest. But what is going to come out of that, I pray for and hope for, is the liberation, of our people, and the reconnecting of humanity, like you said, that has been fractured by this beast of colonialism, because I think that we are so separated all around the world. But when it comes down to it, we are all human beings. We have our cultures, we have our nations, and we have our languages. But we are all connected. And I think that was a goal of colonialism, to create that disconnect and to divert away from a lot of those connections and what really matters. And what matters is our connections, to the life sources, on this earth, and, different things like that. But I mean, it's excruciating at times. I'm involved in this work on a continual basis, and I'm, witness to the constant impacts and tragedy that our people are experiencing, but when we put it in the viewpoint of, this new life cycle that our people, have believed and prophesied about is on the horizon, it makes it a lot more easier to try, to endure. And I just pray that all of humanity would come together in this, and that, this control and the deception of, all of this colonization would be completely shattered, and that we could come, back into our own.
And as you said, the birthing also requires us to be in it, to be committed to the pushing, to be committed to birth the dream, right? The Aymara people
Yes.
said, if you want to see what you're dreaming about, look around. Why are you creating? And we are born into the dream, according to the Aymara people. And in many ways, you can see that a new dream is afoot. You're seeing it everywhere. And no matter how much they try to silence the stories, Indigenous people knew children had gone missing. We knew
Yeah.
thousands of them were missing. We know they are. And the graves that have been found are just, the tip of the iceberg, but we know that there
Yes.
are so many children still out there who have been buried without a proper burial, without a proper ceremony. We know that there are mothers who wept and wonder what happened to their babies till the day they die, and that's unjust. And if that's
Yes.
unjust for my community, that's unjust for anyone, and so I think, I feel in my heart that it means being willing to make ourselves uncomfortable,
Yes.
in the process, because we can't change the world by being safely tucked away in our cocoons at home and hoping that everything will change just because we wish it and we pray for it. Prayer is good. We do need to pray, and we need to be, lean on faith instead of fear. And yet,
Yes.
we also need to be present. We also need to show up. So, as you have been modeling for us and presencing for us the importance of not only noticing, but speaking about it and sharing with others, the stories that affect us, right? The story of the missing women. There's over 5,000 missing women. Where are they? We have serial killers that go for decades. And
Yes.
even though the police knew about it, the victims were not arrested for over a decade. They were murdering people and nothing happened. And now, we have another serial killer in Winnipeg. And, where the idea that I want you to talk about the response the city had for why,
Yeah.
yeah, they released it, they stopped searching.
Yeah. So the police, the Winnipeg police, told the families of the two women that they believed were in one of the landfills that they believed it was not feasible, that too much time had passed, and there were a number of different barriers, such as tons of different clay and different things mixed into the garbage, that they believed that they wouldn't be successful in finding their remains. But these families, and particularly the two daughters of Morgan Harris, who was 39, who was a victim of this serial killer, whom I will not give the honor of saying his name. They, within days of learning that their mother was slaughtered, and the day after that the police told them that they would not search the landfill for her, they are 20 and 21 years old, and they went straight to Ottawa, and they went straight to Parliament Hill and demanded that the federal government step in to help to provide the resources and to pressure the Winnipeg police to find their mothers, to bring them home, and to do whatever it takes. And their pleas, which are horrendous, that they had to do this in front of international media to plead for the remains of their mother. They created enough of an uproar for the feds to, offer the support, and for the Winnipeg police to, in turn, work with the city of Winnipeg to shut the landfill down temporarily while they consider what their options are. That doesn't mean that they're going to search, but there's been experts that have said that it could be feasible. There are cadaver dogs. By the way, these dogs are being used across the country in various communities to sniff out the remains of Indigenous children that died in residential schools. And, some of them are decades and decades old, and they are trained to actually even, sniff out the most minute smell of bones. And so these families and these girls are not taking no for an answer. And many have said, what kind of a message does this send to the world about the value of our women, and to killers that, are, stalking our women, that they can just take them out and leave them in a landfill, and nobody is going to search for them, and so it does tell you a lot. And a lot of people wonder, if they were white women, if they were wealthy people, would the police, put in that effort and resources to search for them? So I think that there's just a lot of, symbolism and parallels between this horrific situation of these, serial killers, and who knows how many more serial killers are out there. He just happened to be caught. But parallels between this, what our women are facing and how our women are viewed as disposable and as trash.
And the structures, the conditions that make people vulnerable to this, the extreme poverty that Indigenous women are forced to live with, that the inhumanity of that extreme poverty is really, there are resorts with still no potable water today in the 21st century.
Yeah. And there is like so many factors stemming, like I said, from the moment that Europeans set foot in these territories, that are still happening today, that yes, put our women in these more vulnerable situations to be targeted. But there is also just an evil, racist, rampant mindset that exists, within this country about the value of our women. And so these people that carry out these violence against our women, this serial killer specifically targeted for Indigenous women. They weren't just random women that he took out on the street. He specifically thought that it was okay and that he had the right to take out the lives of 4 Native women within a 3-month period. And that tells you so much, about the deeply, deeply systemic sickness that we have going on, that needs to be uprooted, that needs to be talked about, and that action needs to be taken on. Because people, there are 231 calls for justice that were released in June of 2019 from the National Inquiry into this crisis, that laid out the blueprint for how to go about stopping this genocide. And little to nothing has been done.
Wow. Thank you so much for all the work you do, for all the ways that you continue to not only call people to the fire, because it's one thing to say, I'm an ally, and to know all the right words to say. And it's another one to be a co-conspirator against the empire.
Yeah, well, the thing is, people often say to me, like, it's not as often anymore, thank God, but I have been told by other journalists or, different people in the industry saying, well, like, you can't tell these stories, you're Indigenous, or, you can't be, attached or involved. And I say to them, well, you know what, like, I absolutely am involved when it comes to these human rights violations. There's no, other side. And there's literal lives at stake. But I have to say that I do have hope. When I see these girls, these young daughters of this murdered Indigenous woman, Morgan Harris, when I saw them do what they did and go straight to the top of the power structures of this country and to shake that up and to not stand down, and they still aren't standing down, that gives me inspiration. That gives me hope. And the hope is in our people. The hope is in the people. The hope is in the women. Morgan's daughter said, Cambria, she said, the fire has been lit and no one is going to put it out.
And that
Hi.
yes. I feel that's a powerful statement to complete an interview. I think that's a beautiful way to remember that as long as we're standing, as long as the women are here, as long as we refuse to look away and pretend it's not happening because it's not happening to us, there is hope. And
Absolutely.
And for me, it's an active hope. It's not like I pray for hope, but I do it. I make hope happen by my actions, by the ways I take steps every day.
Oh, so beautiful. Thank you. Hi.
Thank you so much for being with us. How can people access your book? How can people learn more about your work?
Yeah, so my book is called Our Voice of Fire, a memoir of a warrior rising, and they can get it at any bookstore. It's available on Amazon, and it's available on Audible. I actually narrate it myself, and I publish with various, media organizations. They can follow my social media, Twitter at Songstress28 or Instagram at BMorinStories. Thank you.
Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you, Sylvia. This has been a really powerful interview, so thank you for all the work that you do.
Take care. Thank you for listening to Latin Waves. Latin Waves is an independently produced syndicated radio program made available for free to campus and community radios, and also to the world at latinwavesmedia.com. Please visit the website to hear previous shows, hear about upcoming events, and consider becoming a member for as little as $1 per month.